passage today comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 15. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Then he said, Come no closer, remove the sandals of your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, If I come to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. God said further, Thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my title for all generations. Isn't that a great story? God comes in the burning bush. You know, I see preaching as a conversation. You remember that little verse in the Bible the first time I preached to you, where I suggested that we needed to have conversations about the text. Interesting, Rita said something last week when she offered prayers that people would turn to religion. I thought it was a wonderful prayer. I couldn't agree more. We need more people turning to religion, because if ever humanity was out of its depths in trying to deal with crisis, this is the moment. We're simply out of our depths, not able to deal with the challenges that have come our way. Consider. I mean, we deal with racism. Why is racism so hard? Well, because it requires a change not only of heart, but a change of brain. Because it's based very often on that kind of primal fear of the other. And it requires a change of the heart, a change of the brain, a change of the mind to be able to get past it. It's a huge challenge. Economic injustice. Never mind the economic injustice in this country. Consider this country as compared to the other countries of the world. Economic injustice allows some people to thrive while other people cannot be and do what they are called to be and do. It requires a change of heart, a change of mind. Because when you're afraid of everything that surrounds you, you want to grasp and hold on to more. It requires that change of heart. It is a huge challenge. to get over without religion? Climate change. My goodness gracious. How on earth are we going to work on that when it's as though all of humanity has conspired to do whatever it can to damage the environment, or at least not care about the environment? It would require a significant change in attitude and heart. In fact, all three of those would require the kind of change that lets people see a world not that's competitive, where you have to take what you can get, but instead see a world where everyone is united together, where we impact one another. Understand that when there's a homeless person on the street, it means all of society has failed. It's a fracture in human society. It devolves human society. It's a huge challenge, and the only way we can deal with it is if there is a gigantic change in heart and attitude. And that comes from engaging God in religion. So, how do we get people to be interested in religion? I mean, I know an awful lot of people who are very nice, very generous, want to move into the world and make a difference. I always talk about my dentist friend and his wife. They don't go to church, but they are some of the finest people I know. When our sons were younger, that's how I know them. They have twin boys, and they were Matthew's age. I mean, Alan would find places where he could go and get the boys together and serve in some way. Painting somebody's house, weeding a garden some way. There was some way he wanted to open their hearts. I mean, this is good folks. He really wasn't interested in religion, and I think you could probably think of a lot of your friends who don't go to church. And they are probably fine people, but they're not interested in religion. If we're going to pull them in, if we're going to start to transform hearts, if we're going to solve the kind of issues that humanity is facing, well, we're going to need to find a way to draw people in to communicating and being changed by God. It's important to know why they left. There are two big reasons. At least that's a sort of an informal survey I've taken. The first reason that people leave the church is they say that they cannot worship a God that allows suffering. I imagine you've had a hard time with that too. And you've probably heard that from people. God allows suffering, so why would I worship that God? That's certainly the way my friend Eric looked at it. He said he was going to file suit against the Almighty when he died and went to the courts of heaven. So delightfully Jewish. That's the way they do it in the Psalms. The other reason people leave is for goodness sakes, I simply won't worship a God that damns all the Hindus or the Buddhists. Can't tolerate it. So it's not fair and it's not right. So the pointing and saying God is not just. So why would I worship him? These are two of the biggest reasons why people reject religion and walk away. But each time this God is a God that's called a theist God, a God outside creation that kind of messes with creation in one way or another. It messes in the affairs of men and women, changing things around, trying to God things. This is a theistic God. It is the way the authors of the scriptures understood God. But remember, they thought there was a dome up there, and above the dome was God's domain. Beneath the dome is ours. Yeah. This God, this theist God that messes, well, that God lets us down. I think what people would say. Wonder what you'd say. I mean, if you're being honest, what would you say? Is the God outside that invests himself in the affairs of human beings, does that God live up to your hopes and expectations? Not mine. Doesn't get enough done, lets people suffer. It just doesn't feel right, this God, this theist God. And people therefore turn their backs because that God doesn't make sense. And so they've turned to the only God that does make sense to them, and that's the God of science. And the thing about the God of science is that's really about making ourselves in charge. What we're doing is we're trying to figure out how the world works so we can control it, bend it to our will, give ourselves security and pleasure. The trouble is that we have failed miserably to do so, worshiping that God. Instead of making a world that is perfect and whole and wonderful, we are damaging the environment to the point that eventually it could make us extinct. Worshiping that God does not bring control and security. Instead, what it's done is brought us the problems that we have. Oh, we have succeeded in many ways at doing many wonderful things, but relying on ourselves, well, that hasn't worked because we need a God that's going to change inside, help us to grow and shift so that we can see the world differently and make a better move. What's interesting to me is that it's the great physicists and mathematicians of our time that point towards a different kind of God. I was watching a movie about David Bohm earlier in the week. Einstein referred to him as his spiritual son. He was a physicist, worked in Princeton. He was actually quite controversial. But you may know in physics, there's a problem that nobody's been able to solve. Okay? The universe acts under one set of rules in the macro, in the huge, the bodies, everything we can see, the stars and the table we have and the things that fall, everything works with gravity and so on and so forth. But that same universe at the atomic level or subatomic level doesn't operate by the same rules. I mean, things can be in different places at the same time. It's as though the speed of light doesn't matter at this subatomic level. And many physicists are trying to understand how to make those things cohere. And that's when they start pointing to a mystery that permeates the creation, interpenetrates the creation, something at the very ground of being in creation. And that is who Moses met as he listened to the fire in the bush. That's who Moses met. I am. Something about the being that lives and works and interpenetrates creation. I am who I am, God said. That's my name. Today, it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I am who I am. The name is part of the verb to be. Most scholars feel like it's ambiguous, like it could also be, I will be what I will be. There's something about God that is the ground of being. And when you or I say, here I am, we are an integral expression of that ground of being and becoming. It's a different way to look at God. It makes sense of the world that we've come to understand. And that God moves through all of us and can shift and change. So if I'm looking at God that way, then the stories I hear about what God's done in the world make a great deal more sense, have a great deal more ground, at least for me. Because there's hope in that God, because that God has been guiding the universe forward through all of its changes and all of its growth. And there's an interesting thing about that being and becoming God. If you listen for it, you find out that that God has a character, and the character is that when he hears of suffering, when he sees things that are broken, God acts to heal and make things more perfect. But here's the trick. God does so through you and me and everyone around us. God works interpenetrating creation, helping the world to become more whole, drawing things together in perfect harmony. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. It will be seen in the whole work that we do together. That's what God's saying here. Needs Moses to get the job done. And that's the call that comes to us from a God that is ineffable, can't be nailed down, but that is real and changes us. You know that God? Have you listened? Most of the good people I know, meaning the people who want the world to be a good and healthy place, but who've rejected religion, mostly they will tell me that they're spiritual but not religious. That's, of course, the fastest growing faith outlook in the nation. Spiritual but not religious. I say hallelujah. They're spiritual. Well, that's what Moses was. Moses walked in the wilderness. Moses worked and tried to understand what was going on around him. He struggled and eventually listened and heard the voice of God. That is a spiritual experience that changed him from the inside out. Happened to the Apostle Paul too. Happened to Jesus too. Spiritual but not religious. Well, I'm all for the spiritual. The thing is, without the religion, I'm not sure that I know that many people who really practice their spirituality. Religion is the structure in which we practice spirituality so that we can be touched by and moved by the presence of God. So why do I say all this? You're the ones who are in the church. I don't need to convince you that you need to be here so that you can continually be reminded and supported as you listen for the mystery of God to speak. Well, I'm saying it to you because Rita's right. Our problems are intractable, and people do, in fact, need to turn to religion. If we don't find new ways to talk about it, our society will suffer. So I ask you to consider that as you listen, as you consider who God might be, how this mystery works. It's hard to nail down, but when we spend time with that God, we know for sure that the ground of our being, the love that expresses itself when we become whole, we know that God is looking to take suffering and turn it into beauty. That is the hope of the gospel.